Hi, this is Dr. A with your Anatomy and Physiology review on the urinary system. So let's start with the functions of the urinary system. It is to maintain a stable internal environment, also known as homeostasis, to remove waste products, which would leave in the urine, and to adjust the water and electrolyte levels to keep the body well hydrated, and to maintain and correct the pH. The organs of the urinary system that help make this happen are the two kidneys, the two ureters, the one bladder, and the one urethra. So let's start with the anatomy. The urinary system is also called the genitourinary system or GU system. Its main function is to filter and remove waste from the blood via urine. And every metabolic process produces waste, and waste will become toxic if it is not removed promptly. And a buildup of the waste from metabolism is called uremia. Waste are removed from the body by a system of blood vessels and tubules within the kidneys. And the system of blood vessels and the tubules is where urine or the filtrate of blood that will become urine flows through. And the filtration itself of the blood takes place in the nephron, specifically in the glomerulus. And each kidney has millions of nephrons. And the urine drains from the kidney once it is produced. And then the ureters drain the kidneys down to the bladder. And then the bladder will collect the urine. And once it's full and the bladder empties, the urine will move out through the urethra. So let's talk about the kidneys first. The two kidneys are behind the peritoneum, and so they are called retroperitoneal. So if you thought about everything that's in the abdominal cavity, basically almost everything is on top of the kidneys. If you are looking down from above and looking into the abdominal cavity. So it is underneath the intestines, the colon, the liver, etc. It's just underneath all that. As a matter of fact, if you have kidney pain, it's usually felt in the back because they're all kind of all the way at the bottom there of the abdominal cavity, and they'd be pretty high in the back, kind of like at the bottom of where your ribs are. The concave hilum is the entry point for the renal artery and the exit point for the renal vein and for the ureter. And so the kidneys have this indentation, each one on this medial, and that's the hilum. The artery brings in the blood that needs to be filtered, and the vein takes out the clean blood, and the ureter exits at the hilum also, and it drains the urine that is produced. The outer portion of the kidneys is the cortex, and it's like the kidney shell. So you will see in anatomy, the word cortex is always the outer portion or outer layer of something. The inner layer is the medulla. That's also very common in anatomy, that the inner area is the medulla. The medulla contains pyramids that point inward toward the hilum, and the tip or the papilla of each pyramid opens into a calyx, and the calyces collect urine and empty it into the renal pelvis. I like to think of the calyx or calyces as little funnels. And so there are minor calyces, which are small funnels, and they empty into larger calyces, which are larger funnels, which empty into the renal pelvis, which is the largest funnel, and then it empties into the ureter. And so here are the kidneys, the two kidneys with the ureters that drain into the bladder, and then the bladder that drains into the urethra to the outside. Here is the cortex. So this portion right here is the cortex of the kidney. And here are the pyramids, so they look triangular, and the tip of the pyramid is where the papilla is. And so the nephrons are actually located all here throughout the cortex, with the collecting tubes, the tubules, dangling here into the pyramid. and the urine drips from the pyramids into these calyces. So you see how they look like little funnels here, right there. So these are the calyces, and they drain into the largest of the calyces, or the funnels, which is the renal pelvis. And then you can see the blood supply here. So the renal artery bringing the blood to be filtered, and it goes into smaller and smaller arterioles, which will each enter a nephron. And then the vein drains the clean blood and returns it to the circulation. So the nephron is the working unit of the kidneys. If your nephrons are damaged, then your kidneys start losing function. Each nephron has a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. The renal corpuscle is more like rounded, and the tubule is tube-like. The corpuscle filters the blood using the glomerular capsule and the glomerulus. The glomerulus is actually a ball of capillaries, and the arteries bring the blood to that glomerulus. So afferent arterioles will carry the blood to the glomeruli, and efferent arterioles will carry the blood away from the glomeruli. But they're still arterioles. The whole thing is the glomerulus is a little ball of arterioles, and then with capillaries in the actual glomerulus. So if you're trying to remember afferent and efferent, and which one's which, think of afferent starts with A, it arrives at the glomeruli, and efferent starts with an E, it exits the glomeruli. It's about the best I can do for you to remember that. So water and substances are removed from the blood into corpus gold. So at the glomeruli, it's filtered, and it flows into the renal tubule. So the tubes catch that filtrate, and the tubules then are going to adjust the composition of that filtrate until it becomes urine. So there's a lot of things that are going to be reclaimed that got filtered, but that need to return into the blood, like glucose and some amino acids and different things like that, maybe some sodium, and it may be some water. It's going to move those components and return what needs to be returned to the blood, and leave what needs to be carried out of the body in the filtrate, which will become urine. The tubules are divided into 4 parts. There is the proximal convoluted tubule, which is proximal or closest to the nephron, to the glomerulus. And so we have the glomerulus, proximal convoluted tubule. Then we have the nephron loop, which loops down actually into the pyramid and back up. And then the distal convoluted tubule, and then the collecting tubule. The collecting tubules also loop down into the pyramids. And only part of the nephron loop goes all the way down. It kind of depends also on the location of the nephron. So proximal convoluted tubule is the closest to the glomerulus. The distal convoluted tubule is the furthest away from the glomerulus as you follow the path of the filtrate. And then the collecting tubule is kind of the last chance to modify the filtrate, to maybe reclaim some water. And once the liquid leaves the collecting tubule, it is urine, and it's on its way out of the body. So this is what it looks like. So we have our artery here bringing some blood that needs to be cleaned with the afferent arteriole. And here is a ball of capillaries called the glomerulus. And then here is the efferent arteriole exiting and leaving the glomerulus. And it is going to wrap around the tubules and turn, there's a capillary bed around the tubules. And then it's going to turn into venules and veins. And then it's going to drain and leave the kidneys. And as you can see, there's a difference in diameter between the afferent and the efferent arteriole, and that's what creates the pressure to push the fluid out of the glomerulus of all the capillaries and into the tubules. And so here's distal convoluted tubule, and convoluted means like twisting and turning, basically, so you can see how that's appropriate. And then, so after the distal convoluted tubule, we have a descending nephron loop and then the ascending nephron loop. So this is also known as the nephron loop or the loop of Henle. And then we have the proximal convoluted the distal convoluted tubule right next to the proximal there. Distal convoluted tubule, and the distal convoluted tubule connects to the collecting duct, and other nephrons connect to the collecting duct, and then the urine is going to drip out of the collecting duct into the papilla, into the calyx, make its way out of the kidney. So the ureters carry urine from the renal pelvis to the urinary bladder. So the urine is just going to flow down. The ureters are tubes that are less than 1/4 of an inch wide, and they're between 10 and 12 inches long, and they're aligned with mucous membrane, and they also have some little smooth muscle that lines it, that helps kind of squeeze the urine down if there is a need to move it. Next is a urinary bladder. So the bladder is an elastic muscular sac. It's in the base of the pelvis. It's composed of 3 layers of smooth muscle that's lined with rugae. Rugae we've seen already in the digestive system. They're folds, right? And whenever you see folds like that, it's usually so that the organ can distend or become more inflated, if you will, except it's not with it's not with air, it's with water or urine. So the rugae allow the bladder to fill up and then become smaller, and that's also where the smooth muscle helps it distend and then come back down to a normal size. So the bladder receives and stores urine from the ureters. It can hold between 300 and 400 milliliters of urine. So once the bladder is full, it signals to the brain the urge to empty, and then you have the urge to go to the bathroom. And those involuntary muscles cause the bladder to contract and that internal sphincter to relax, and that's part of the cues of you feeling that you don't have control of it over it happening, but it gives you the feeling, the sensation of needing to go to the bathroom. And then the voluntary muscles control the external sphincter for the intentional emptying. So that's you will run over to the bathroom, you get on the potty, and then you can pee. And so that voluntary control is you controlling those voluntary muscles to let the urine out. Bladder control is developed sometime after a person reaches the age of 2, and that's the whole point of potty training is bladder control, but also feces control, so defecation control. But it starts with bladder control. The urethra is a tubular canal that carries the urine out of the bladder. It is lined with a mucous membrane. The female urethra is only 1 to 2 inches long, whereas a male urethra is 8 inches long because it has to make the length of the penis. And with the female urethra being shorter, females are also more prone to getting urinary tract infections because it's easier for bacteria to just make it up to 1 to 2 inches long urethra and get into the bladder. In women, the urethra serves only to carry urine out of the body, but in men, it carries both urine and semen out of the body. So here is a diagram of the male urethra, and so we have the urinary bladder right here, and then here is the urethra. It comes out through the prostate gland, goes down the penis and out, which also means that if males have a problem with a swollen prostate gland, it will affect their ability to empty their bladder, and they'll have problems going to the bathroom. And then here's the female one. So here is the female urethra right here with the urinary bladder right there. So you can see how much shorter it is. And then separate is the opening to the vagina with the uterus, cervix, etc. So what is the role of the kidney in homeostasis? Homeostasis is balance in the body. So the urinary system continually maintains the proper balance of water and chemicals in the body. If the body has too little water, the kidneys will conserve it by pulling it from urine and putting it back into the body. If the body has excess water, the kidneys then can excrete it. Same thing for a lot of the electrolytes, especially sodium and other components like hydrogen ions, bicarbonate, etc. So the kidneys also regulate the levels of electrolytes, which are small biological important molecules, and they help to maintain the correct pH within the body. So the electrolytes are like your sodium, your potassium, chloride, and so the kidneys are very involved in regulating the sodium balance, or wherever sodium moves, chloride will move. And they help maintain the correct the pH within the body by moving hydrogen ions and bicarb, depending on where they need to go, if there's excess in the body that needs to be taken out in the urine, or if some needs to be reclaimed and added back to the body. So all of these tasks are accomplished through urine production. So let's look at the stages of urine production. As nephrons remove the waste, many desirable molecules are also initially removed from the blood, so it just kind of filters everything. And then to prevent these molecules from being lost or excreted, there are several stages of urine production. So filtration is where everything crosses over into the filtrate, which will eventually become urine. And reabsorption is the stage where the stuff that's valuable to the body is reclaimed. And then secretion is another step where you can get rid of some more molecules that might need to be gotten rid of to finally adjust the balance in the body. So filtration is the first stage. It occurs in the renal capsule as the pressure forces the material out of the blood and into the renal tubules. So it happens at the glomerulus. And the material is a fluid that's called glomerular filtrate or filtrate, and that filtrate will contain water, electrolytes, nutrients, waste, and toxins. Obviously, the substances that we might need to reclaim are nutrients and electrolytes and water. We don't really want to reclaim much in the waste and toxins, right? So reabsorption is the second stage. It occurs as the filtrate passes through the four sections of the renal tubule, which were the distal convoluted tubule, descending loop, ascending loop, and proximal convoluted tubule, and I just said them in the wrong order. So it's proximal convoluted tubule, descending loop, ascending loop, distal convoluted tubule. That is the right order, but those are the four components either way. Most of the water, electrolytes, and nutrients are going to be reabsorbed because they're valuable, and they return to the blood via the peritubular capillaries. Secretion is the third stage of urine production, and it occurs as special cells of the renal tubules can secrete excess ammonia, uric acid, and other waste like certain drugs directly into the renal tubule. And sometimes these are components that were maybe too large or still bound up on albumin and could not enter the filtrate through filtration. Urine formation is finished at this point, and the urine proceeds through the kidneys and eventually out of the body. So here are the stages. We have arterial blood into the glomerulus and out the efferent arteriole. It's going to be around the tubes, peritubular capillaries here. So the filtrate is made. We have proximal convoluted tubule, where filtration happens and reabsorption starts to happen. And then secretion can start happening here at the end of the proximal convoluted tubule and into the descending loop. And then we have the ascending loop. We have some more reabsorption going on there. And then we have some secretion that can happen there and in the distal convoluted tubule. And then if needed at the collecting tubule, there's a way that water can be reabsorbed still in the collecting tubule. But once the urine has left the collecting tubule, it cannot be modified in any way. So urine is deep gold to clear in color. It is sterile during production and collection, but becomes contaminated as it exits the body because it picks up bacteria and stuff. It contains water, electrolytes, toxins, and nitrogenous waste. Nitrogenous waste are waste from nitrogen-containing compounds, and the compounds in your blood that contain nitrogen are all the amino acids and proteins. Glucose blood or albumin in urine will indicate a disease process. And normal urine output is 1,000 to 2,000 milliliters in a 24-hour period. Normal urine is acidic. The specific gravity of your urine indicates the amount of dissolved substances. It doesn't tell you what substances are there. So a concentrated urine would have a high specific gravity. A dilute urine would have a low specific gravity. So a quick look at what a normal urinalysis or normal urine composition would look like. So the color should be straw colored, pale yellow to deep gold. It has just kind of an aromatic urine odor. It should not have a strong ammonia odor. It should be clear. Specific gravity is fine all the way from 1.001 to 1.030. So 1.001 would be more dilute or very dilute. 1.030 would be more concentrated. A pH can vary between 5.0 to 8.0. There should be no protein to maybe a trace amount of protein. There should be no glucose, no ketones, no blood, and no white cells or nitrites or anything else. The color varies depending on the patient's fluid intake and or medication. There are some medications that can turn urine interesting colors like a blue-green. Brown or black urine color indicates a serious disease process, potentially liver failure or some other abnormalities. Odor, so any fetid or foul odor can indicate an infection, while fruity odor may be found in diabetes mellitus, dehydration or starvation, and other odors may be due to medications or foods. The appearance, so cloudiness, may mean that an infection is present. Specific gravity, concentrated urine has higher specific gravity, so dilute urine, such as can be found with diabetes insipidus, acute tubular necrosis, or salt-restricted diets would have a lower specific gravity. The pH value is below 7.0 is acidic and is common in urinary tract infections, in metabolic or respiratory acidosis, because you have excess acids that you're trying to get rid of and you're going to get rid of them through urine. Any diets high in fruits and vegetables, or the administration of some drugs. A pH that is higher than 7, which is basic or alkaline, is common in metabolic or respiratory alkalosis, in fever, in high protein diets, and in taking ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. Protein may indicate glomerulonephritis or preeclampsia in a pregnant woman, so that's why we screen for protein. Glucose, a small amount of glucose could be simply present as a result of eating a high carbohydrate meal or drinking a soda, for example, or stress or pregnancy or taking some medications. But higher levels may indicate a poorly controlled diabetes, a Cushing syndrome, or potentially an infection. Ketones, the presence of ketones can indicate poorly controlled diabetes, especially in type 1 diabetes, dehydration, starvation, or ingestion of large amounts of aspirin. Ketones are the byproduct of burning fat as fuel. Blood may indicate glomerulonephritis, cancer of the urinary tract, some types of anemia, taking some types of medications such as blood thinners, arsenic poisoning, reaction to transfusions, traumas, burns, convulsions, and other things that can irritate the bladder. And that is the last one. And I don't have a slide, I'm sorry, on white cells, and so white cells and nitrites should be present on there too. I mean, that should be talked about too. The white cells obviously should not be present, and if they are present, they could indicate an infection. And the nitrite test is a test for bacteria, and there should not be any bacteria there. But if the nitrites are positive, then it indicates that bacteria are present and there could be a urinary tract infection because of the bacteria. So, sorry, that made this lesson a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure we went over all of this for your review. So I hope you found that helpful.